All right, this is chapter 4, game number 4. In this one, we are looking at kind of a strange move order, but it transposes into our exchange variation. And we see an early f4 by white. And here on move 5, we're playing bishop f5. What's the idea here?
Well, I mean, we're getting the bishop outside of the chain so that we can play e6, and then we're probably going to try to go for our standard Caro setup, which is the bishop d6, queen c7, and knight to e7, and probably try to go for our f6 break. I mean, it looks like that's maybe not going to be possible, but we can put a lot of firepower behind that square if we need to, and we're going to blast things open.
Yeah, this one definitely becomes an interesting battle over this e5 break. So white plays very solid, puts all of his pawns on dark squares. And then a real early knight e5, which I see this and it kind of encourages me to play f6.
I think it really does. I think their idea is that like maybe they think we're going to be afraid of this check, and maybe we don't want to play f6 because of the check, and we'll look at that. But and so f6 is what was played, and we essentially just gain a tempo on our plan that we wanted to go for anyway.
Yeah, so the check wasn't played in the game, but let's look at it. So we can meet this with pawn to g6. And now because of the fork, there's only one move for white. Take on c6. We take back, the queen retreats. And now we could play a move like h5. And even though we have all of these pawns on light squares that are potentially weak, it's actually pretty solid. And I don't see a straightforward plan for white.
Yeah, I like h5. It kind of reminds me of those situations where you have the knight on f5 and you play h4 to solidify it, so there's no g4. It's kind of fun to see that same idea with with a bishop on f5 instead.
And now it seems even stronger because it's like g4 is really not coming. Whereas with the knight, sometimes they can force it through.
Yeah.
So white captures, knight takes c6. We take back and bring their other knight to f3. Now we kind of just go with this standard development. Knight to e7, bishop e2, queen c7. So what's our idea here?
Well, as you see the arrows on the board, we may be going to play c5 or maybe going to play e5. Or, I mean, we're also making black think, like, is black thinking that like we're going to like castle queenside and play g5, which we're not going to do. But but yeah, we're just adding more pressure to our big breaks, which is e5 c5, which is this sort of Caro-Slav structure that we sort of have. If you envision that like our d pawn was missing, the E and the C pawns are sort of really characteristic pawns from the Caro-Kann.
I also like that it puts this immediate attack on the f4 pawn. There's not a great way to defend it, either queen to d2 or pawn to g3. And when I see a move like pawn to g3, look at this pawn chain. And it's all blocking the dark square bishop, and it opens up the light squares for us to attack. So I really don't like g3 for white.
Yeah, I wouldn't like it either, but I don't know what else they could have done. Maybe queen to d2, but like and queen to d2 is a really weird looking move because the bishop's stuck there as well. It seems like they're going to be almost forced to play the g3 at some point. And when I
Yeah.
see that pawn chain like that, I'm already thinking like, let me trade the light square bishops. Let me trade my bishop for a knight, and then like let's go into an end game where they have terrible bishop.
Yeah, and I just did a YouTube video on this of Matt Stratz, knight versus bishop. And
Yeah.
it's like my favorite imbalance, having that dominant knight against a trapped bishop. So white castles after we castle, and then knight to g6. And this move is to support the e5 break, but black did miss a nice chance here.
Yeah, e5 immediately is it's totally possible. But yeah, c5 is nice because I like c5 just that trying to open up some dark squares versus the black, or excuse me, versus the white king.
And now when at this point, when they play bishop to e3, we actually have an option even to play c4 and go after the queenside pawn. So I kind of like that too. We could either keep the pawn there and play, let's say, rook to b8, or we
Yeah,
could push past.
yeah, I like pushing past and then targeting this guy because it's difficult to support because we cover that square already, and white really doesn't want to trade the light square bishops, which we might sort of force them to if they're going to try to hold the pawn. So
And this is like heading towards that imbalance that you talked about earlier. We're really going to try to cement that bishop behind the dark pawns and trade off our light bishop, like you mentioned.
yeah, yeah.
So c5 there would have been an improvement, I think, for black. He played knight to g6. And now white plays h4. This is a bit reckless of a move. The knight on g6 can actually always retreat. And at this point, black found an interesting idea. And you put in the notes, JD. Nimzovich would be proud of this move, but it might
Yeah.
be a little better to wait. Black played knight to h8. What's the idea here?
Well, the whole point of the knight being on g6 was to support e5, and we still want to do that. So, and potentially that knight's going to get kicked. So the idea is that, well, I'm going to support it from f7 instead of g6.
And probably a little bit stronger. Start with, for example, rook to e8. And then when h5 is played, then do the knight maneuver. Um,
Yeah, and I don't think we're worried about h6 getting played.
no, I think we could push past, and maybe this pawn will become a liability for white.
Perhaps so. Yeah, yeah. I think that's definitely going to be the case.
So knight h8 played in the game. h5, so white didn't really take advantage of it. Knight to f7 by black. Knight to h4. So white's trying to gain the bishop pair here, trying to trade their knight for bishop. But black has a nice move, bishop to e4. And white has this situation where he really doesn't want to trade light square bishops like we talked about. And that bishop on e4 is looking very strong there, just pointing around the white king.
Yeah, it's clear what our plan is. Like we're going to play e5, and we're going to. I mean, white has moved all of these pawns in front of his king, and I really feel like we have a super comfortable and clear plan. Whereas, like, what's white doing? Are they really think they're gonna play g4 g5?
I think so. I feel like that's white's kind of all in. G4, G5, maybe F5. I think white wants a kingside attack. So in the game, he played bishop to G4, poking at this pawn. And F5 is actually a good move here too. Like even though it goes against the E5 push, we could shift
Hmm.
gears and play C5 and play on the queen side for a while. But I think in this position, black played more in kind of the nature of this uh, game so far. You know, kept with a consistent plan, just simply rook to E8.
Which I like, and I think that I would probably have gone the same way. It can be hard to switch plans, and when you've got all of your pieces set up for this like e5 break, and to suddenly switch to f5, like it's hard to do that.
And this seems more practical too. Like when black has control in the center and on the queen side, why shut down one area where you have control? You know, let's keep this e5 plan open and this e5 plan open.
Yeah,
Here,
for
white
sure.
plays b4, trying to lock down one of the two plans. And since we're flexible, e5 by black gets exactly what he wanted.
Yeah, and I mean things are gonna just blow up, and we're much better developed to handle this. I mean, the dark square bishop was stuck, which was holding the rook in for the white side. I mean, and white really can't afford to capture and like on e5. I think because that's just gonna bring in additional pieces for us and open up additional lines. Then g3 is just so weak right now.
Yeah, I agree. I think all of these tactics are about to favor black, and we're going to see that right after bishop e3 on this next move. Black initiates the trades with e takes f4, and look at this. We have an open line to the bishop now. And tactics are about to happen. So white has to take back. Bishop takes f4. It's the only move. And in this position, there's a really cool move for black. Black can actually play pawn to g5.
Yeah, I like this a lot because it absolutely is. Well, okay, they don't have to take en passant. I suppose they could take our bishop, but we're gonna play queen takes, and then when the knight moves, we're gonna take on g3, and this is no good. This is super no bueno.
So what if
Uh,
they take h takes g?
yeah, I like it because we can just take uh, yeah, we can take back, and then we're gonna play king g7 and use the h file.
Yeah, look at this. So king g7, rook to h8. Very nice idea. I'll just show a couple moves, kind of showing the power of that rook on h8. This pawn's coming up, and look at that e4 bishop. Exactly what we talked about earlier. Queen's tying down g3. This is actually already a lost position for white, -7 eval at this point.
Terrible, terrible.
So that was maybe a slight improvement for black. Bishop takes f4 though, still a good move.
Yeah, we still have a great eval.
And g5 here does still work, but this move is equally as strong. Knight to g5. with this nice threat, knight to h3 check.
It's not a threat just yet, was it? I mean, it's still covered by the bishop.
Oh, that's a good point. Okay, so maybe f5 first. f5 and then
Yeah,
try to get knight to h3 check.
yeah, yeah.
So then white plays bishop to f3. Ooh, that just allows knight h3 check.
Yeah. Which it's again one of those situations where I'm not sure why it wasn't played because it just wins a rook or an exchange rather.
Yeah, so I think that is the strongest move here. Knight h3 check. Black chose to take on f3 first. Knight takes. Now knight h3 check.
I suppose yeah, just it ends up being pretty close to the same, I think.
Yeah, and white's in big trouble now. The king's still open. Black is up the exchange. And an
And some
extra,
pawns.
yeah, one extra pawn is dropping. I guess white has a one queenside pawn, but we're what, +3 on material, +9 according to the computer with an
And
attack.
I don't know what I don't the material we're up in exchange in a pawn, but if you were to say like how much material we up for that white king, it's a bunch.
Yeah. All right, so I think we could probably stop the game at this point. It goes like 5 more moves. You can check the PGN. But what would you say were the main middle game takeaways from this game?
I think this is just a really clean execution of our f6 e5 break. And just, we got a really solid center when they took on c6. And really, I would be willing to bet that Black really didn't spend very much time in this game because they just played really natural moves. And I bet it all came to them pretty quickly.
And I think that that combination of e5 and c5 was worth noting, and just really watching the opponent's weak squares and their weak dark square bishop and how he was kind of hemmed in by the pawns. All right, so that wraps up game number 4 from chapter number 4, the exchange variation. And next we are going to chapter 5, which is the Tartakower accepted lines. So we'll see you all in the next chapter.